The darkness between galaxies stirred for the first time in 3 million years. Something vast and hungry opened eyes that had witnessed the birth and death of countless worlds. The Kethamori had slept long enough. Captain Zexthar of the Altarian Defense Fleet received the first distress signal at Euro 347 ship time. The message came from Kepler Station, a mining outpost on the galaxy's outer rim. The transmission was broken and filled with static, but the terror in the operator's voice was clear. Unknown vessels approaching, massive biomechanical signatures. They're not responding to any communications. Oh gods, what are those things? Then silence. Zexthar tried to contact Kepler Station 17 times over the next hour. Each attempt met with dead space. He ordered his ship, the Starweaver, to jump to the station's coordinates. When they arrived, they found nothing but empty space, and a few pieces of crystallized debris that sparkled like broken glass in the starlight. The debris was all that remained of a station that had housed 12,000 beings. Within days, more reports flooded in from across the outer rim. Colonies, mining stations, and patrol ships were vanishing without a trace. The only evidence left behind was the same strange crystallized material. Scientists who examined the debris made a disturbing discovery. The crystal contained traces of organic matter from every known species, compressed and transformed into something that hurt to look at directly. The Galactic Confederation called an emergency session. Representatives from 400 worlds gathered on the capital planet of New Geneva. The Great Assembly Hall, usually filled with diplomatic chatter and political debates, fell silent as Admiral Korath of the Thraxi Empire presented the latest intelligence reports. The enemy has consumed 47 worlds in the past 3 weeks, Korath announced, his forearms gesturing at the holographic display that showed red zones spreading across the galaxy's edge. Our scouts have managed to observe them from a distance. The beings call themselves the Kethamori. The display showed images that made several delegates physically ill. Massive ships that looked like a fusion of metal and living tissue moved through space like predatory fish. They were kilometers long, with surfaces that pulsed and writhed as if breathing. Strange tendrils extended from their hulls, reaching out to caress planets before the world simply stopped existing as anything recognizable. The Kethamori don't just destroy, Korath continued. They consume. Every trace of life, every bit of biological energy, gets absorbed into their ships. The planets are left as crystallized husks, completely dead but somehow still watching. Ambassador Veltan of the Cetacean Collective raised a tentacle. Have we attempted communication? Perhaps they can be reasoned with. Korath's mandibles clicked in what his species considered bitter laughter. We've tried every known form of communication. Mathematical sequences, musical patterns, electromagnetic pulses, even telepathic contact. The Kethamori don't respond because they don't see us as intelligent life. To them, we're just food that happens to build interesting structures. The assembly erupted in worried chatter. The Confederation had faced many threats over its 1,000-year history, but nothing like this. Wars could be won through diplomacy or superior tactics. Natural disasters could be predicted and avoided. But how do you fight something that treats entire civilizations as a snack? Our military analysts have developed a strategy, Korath announced, bringing order back to the room. We'll evacuate the outer rim and establish a defensive line at the meridian sectors. Combined fleets from all member worlds will— That won't work, interrupted a voice from the back of the assembly. All eyes turned to the human delegation. Humans were the newest members of the Confederation, having joined only 50 years ago after their rather violent first contact with a Zephyrian patrol fleet. Most species still considered them to be barely civilized warmongers who had somehow stumbled into space travel. Admiral Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force stood slowly. She was a small woman by human standards, but something in her gray eyes made the massive alien delegates uncomfortable. The Kethamori aren't a military force, she said in accented galactic standard. They're a biological function. Like a virus or a cancer, you can't negotiate with cancer. And what would humans know about fighting such a threat? Demanded Ambassador Veltan, his tentacles writhing with irritation. Chen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Everything, she said simply. Before anyone could ask what she meant, new alarms began sounding throughout the assembly hall. A courier ship had just arrived with urgent news from the front lines. The Kethamori had accelerated their advance. They had consumed 3 major worlds in a single day, including the heavily fortified planet of Xerion Prime. The holographic display updated to show the enemy's new position. The red zone now extended deep into Confederation space, much faster than anyone had predicted possible. Panic began to spread through the assembly as delegates realized the outer rim evacuation plans were already obsolete. "They're adapting," Chen observed, studying the tactical display with professional interest. "Learning our patrol patterns, anticipating our responses. The more they consume, the smarter they get." "Then what do you suggest?" Korath asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Chen looked around the assembly hall, noting the fear in hundreds of alien faces. These were species that had known peace for centuries, who had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival against an enemy that wanted them extinct. "You need to understand what you're really fighting," she said. "This isn't a war, it's an extermination. The Kethmori aren't here to conquer or enslave. They're here to feed. And they've done this before." She gestured to her aide, who activated a new holographic display. It showed deep space survey data that humans had been quietly collecting since joining the Confederation. "We found 17 dead galaxies," Chen continued. "Each one contains the same crystallized debris fields where worlds used to be. The Kethmori have been doing this for millions of years, moving from galaxy to galaxy like locusts. They consume everything, sleep for a few million years, then wake up hungry again." The assembly hall fell silent except for the sounds of frightened breathing and nervous chittering. "The good news," Chen said, "is that they can be killed. The bad news is that every species that figured out how to do it died in the process. Until now." Ambassador Veltan's tentacles curled defensively. "What makes humans different?" Chen's smile returned, colder than before. "We're very good at killing things that need to die." As if summoned by her words, another alarm began sounding. This time, it was the proximity alert for the capital system itself. Long-range sensors had detected something massive approaching from the direction of the outer rim. Something that pulsed with sickly biomechanical life. The Kethmori had found New Geneva. Through the assembly hall's great windows, delegates could see ships launching from orbital defense platforms. The Confederation's finest vessels rose to meet the threat, their hulls gleaming with advanced shield generators and particle beam weapons that could crack planets. They watched in horrified silence as those same ships were casually swatted aside by writhing tendrils that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. The crystallization process began immediately, turning proud warships into glittering debris within minutes. Chen stood and gathered her files. "The Confederation is welcome to continue trying diplomatic solutions," she said to the stunned assembly. "Humanity will be taking a different approach." As she walked toward the exit, the lights in the assembly hall began to flicker. Outside, the sky was turning an unnatural shade of purple as something vast and hungry descended toward the planet's surface. The Kethmori had arrived, and the galaxy's long nightmare was about to begin. The emergency evacuation of New Geneva took 18 hours. 18 hours of organized chaos as billions of beings fled the capital world, while the Kethmori circled overhead like vultures. The ancient biomechanical ships didn't attack immediately. They simply waited, as if savoring the fear that radiated from the planet below. Admiral Chen watched the evacuation from the bridge of the UES Defiance, humanity's newest and most advanced warship. Unlike the sleek, elegant vessels preferred by other Confederation species, the Defiance looked like it had been built for war and nothing else. Its hull was angular and brutal, covered in weapon ports and armor plating that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Ma'am," reported Lieutenant Torres from the communications station, "we're receiving a transmission from the Thraxi flagship. Admiral Korath wants to speak with you." Chen nodded. "Put him through." Korath's image appeared on the main screen, his forearms gesturing frantically behind him as his bridge crew worked to coordinate the evacuation. "Admiral Chen, thank the ancestors you're still here. We need every ship we can get for the rearguard action." "What exactly are you planning, Admiral?" Chen asked. "Standard fighting withdrawal," Korath replied. "We'll hold them here as long as possible, while the civilian transports reach the inner systems. Your ship could make a real difference in the defensive screen." Chen studied the tactical display that showed Confederation forces forming up around the planet. Dozens of ships from various species. Their crews probably scared but determined to do their duty. Good beings fighting for their homes and families. They were all going to die. "Admiral," Chen said carefully. You do realize that conventional tactics won't work against the Kethmori? Korath's mandibles clicked irritably. I understand human military doctrine favors aggressive action, but this is a delicate operation requiring precise coordination. We've been fighting wars for 1,000 years while your species was still throwing rocks at each other. The comment stung, but Chen had heard worse. Most Confederation species viewed humans as violent primitives who had somehow lucked into advanced technology. They tolerated human membership in the Alliance but rarely took human military advice seriously. With respect, Admiral, Chen replied, you've been fighting wars against other civilized species. The Kethmori aren't civilized. They're a force of nature, like a hurricane or a plague. You can't fight a hurricane with proper formations and coordinated fire patterns. Then what would you suggest? Korath asked, though his tone suggested he was merely being polite. Chen was about to answer when new contacts appeared on the sensor display. More Kethmori ships were emerging from the outer system, moving in perfect formation toward the planet. Each ship was easily 10 times larger than the biggest Confederation vessel. I suggest, Chen said quietly, that you evacuate your forces along with the civilians. Let us handle this. Korath's laugh was harsh. Handle this? Admiral, you have one ship. We have 47 vessels with some of the finest crews in the galaxy. And they'll all be dead within the hour if they stay, Chen replied flatly. The insult hung in the air between them. Several other Confederation commanders had joined the communication link, and Chen could see the anger and disbelief on their faces. To them, her comment wasn't tactical analysis. It was human arrogance at its worst. Admiral Chen, said Captain Veltar of the cetacean heavy cruiser Deep Current. Perhaps humans should leave the military strategy to species with more experience. Perhaps, Chen agreed. Torres cut the connection. The screen went dark, leaving Chen alone with her thoughts and her crew. Around the bridge, human officers worked quietly at their stations. Unlike their alien counterparts, they didn't seem scared or angry. They seemed focused, like predators preparing for a hunt. Ma'am, said Commander Hayes, the ship's tactical officer. Should we join the defensive formation? Negative, Chen replied. Signal the fleet. Humanity is withdrawing from joint operations. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Ma'am? You heard me. Send a message to Earth Command. Code 7 authorization. Every human officer on the bridge straightened at those words. Code 7 was the authorization for total war protocols. Emergency powers that had never been used since humanity joined the Confederation. Powers that most alien species assumed were just rumors. Are you sure, Admiral? Hayes asked quietly. Chen looked at the tactical display, watching the Kethmori ships move closer to the planet. She could see the Confederation forces forming their neat little defensive lines, preparing to fight an enemy they didn't understand with tactics that had worked against civilized opponents. The galaxy is about to learn something important, she said. When you threaten humanity's friends, you become humanity's enemy. And humanity is very, very good at killing its enemies. The Defiance began to pull back from the planet, leaving the Confederation forces to face the Kethmori alone. As they moved away, Chen's communications officer picked up increasingly desperate transmissions from the alien fleet. The battle lasted exactly 37 minutes. Chen watched from a safe distance as the Kethmori tore through the Confederation defensive line like it was made of paper. The alien ships fired their most advanced weapons, energy beams that could melt asteroids and missile salvos that could level cities. The attacks had no visible effect on the biomechanical horrors. In response, the Kethmori extended their feeding tendrils. Any ship touched by those writhing appendages simply stopped existing as anything recognizable. The proud vessels became crystallized sculptures, beautiful and terrible and completely dead. Admiral Korath's flagship lasted longer than most, but in the end, it suffered the same fate. Chen watched the Thraxi Admiral's final transmission, a brief message that contained more fear than she had ever heard in any being's voice. Tell them, Korath whispered as his ship began to crystallize around him. Tell them we tried. The transmission cut out, and another beautiful crystal joined the growing collection orbiting New Geneva. 3 weeks later, a Kethmori scout ship entered human space. The colony of New Pittsburgh was a small settlement on the edge of human territory. 50,000 people living simple lives on a world that barely rated a mention in most star charts. The colonists were farmers, miners, and craftspeople who had wanted to get away from the crowded inner worlds. The Kethmori scout found them easily. Chen received the news while the Defiance was docked at Earth's orbital shipyard. The entire colony had been consumed in less than an hour. 50,000 human lives reduced to crystallized carbon that sparkled in the light of a foreign sun. But something else had happened at New Pittsburgh. Something that changed everything. The colonists had fought back. While the Confederation species had relied on military vessels and trained crews, the humans on New Pittsburgh had used mining explosives, improvised weapons, and pure stubborn rage. They couldn't stop the Kethmori scout from consuming their world, but they had managed to damage it. Badly. The biomechanical ship limped away from New Pittsburgh, trailing strange fluids and sending distress signals that human intelligence intercepted and decoded. For the first time in millions of years, the Kethmori had been hurt by their prey. Chen stood in the communications center of Earth Command, reading the analysis reports with growing satisfaction. Around her, the greatest military minds of humanity worked at consoles and planning tables, designing something the galaxy had never seen before. "Ma'am," said General Morrison, head of strategic planning, "the retrofit programs are ahead of schedule. We'll have the first wave ready in 6 weeks. "And the volunteers?" Chen asked. Morrison's expression grew grim. "More than we can use. Every human colony wants to participate. They're calling it the Great Hunt," Chen nodded. She had expected as much. Humans had a reputation for being violent and unpredictable, but what most species didn't understand was that human violence was usually directed and purposeful. Humans didn't fight for conquest or glory. They fought to protect what they loved. And something had just killed 50,000 people they considered family. "Signal all human colonies," Chen ordered. "Begin Phase 1 of the Total War Protocols, and send a message to whatever's left of the Confederation leadership." "What should it say, ma'am?" Chen smiled, and for the first time since New Pittsburgh there was genuine warmth in her expression. It was the smile of a predator that had found worthy prey. "Tell them," she said, "that humanity is going hunting." For 6 weeks humanity went silent. The surviving Confederation leadership sent dozens of messages to human space, requesting updates on their military preparations. Each message went unanswered. Scout ships trying to enter human territory found their way blocked by automated defense, platforms that politely but firmly turned them away. Humanity regrets that access to human space is temporarily restricted. The platforms announced in perfect galactic standard. "Please try again after the current situation is resolved." Ambassador Veltan of the Cetacean Collective found this behavior deeply troubling. In the emergency sessions being held on the backup capital world of Harmony Station, he repeatedly expressed his concerns to the remaining Confederation leaders. "Something is happening in human space," he reported to the Emergency Council. "Our long-range sensors are detecting massive industrial activity. Energy signatures unlike anything in our databases. And the radio chatter." He paused, his tentacles writhing with distress. "What about the radio chatter?" asked Minister Kolesh of the Avian Republic. "It's all in human languages, but our translators are having trouble with the terminology. Words like planet cracker and reality anchor and voluntary enhancement protocols. The humans are building something, and they don't want us to know what it is." The council members exchanged worried glances. Humanity had always been unpredictable, but this level of secrecy was unprecedented. Some species were beginning to wonder if they had made a mistake in trusting the violent newcomers. Meanwhile, the Kethmori continued their advance through Confederation space. Without unified military resistance, they consumed worlds at an accelerating pace. Entire star systems went dark every few days. Their populations added to the growing collection of crystallized trophies that the biomechanical ships carried like jewelry. The few survivors who managed to escape the consumption zones brought horrifying reports. The Kethmori weren't just feeding anymore. They were experimenting. Some worlds were partially consumed, leaving behind twisted landscapes where crystallized forests grew in impossible patterns. Other planets were used as breeding grounds for new types of biomechanical horrors. It was clear that the ancient entities were preparing for something. But what? The answer came when the Kethmori probe finally reached Earth's solar system. The probe was a relatively small vessel, only a few kilometers long compared to the massive harvester ships. Its purpose was simple: scout the human homeworld and determine if the species was worth consuming or if they could be safely ignored while the main fleet finished with the Confederation, what the probe found defied all expectations. Earth's solar system had been transformed into a fortress. Every asteroid had been converted into a weapons platform. The planet Mars was no longer visible, hidden behind a shell of orbital shipyards that pulsed with strange energy signatures. Jupiter's moons had been hollowed out and turned into ammunition factories. And everywhere, ships moved in perfect formations. Ships that looked nothing like the vessels humanity had used before. These new human ships were wrong in ways that hurt to contemplate. They seemed to bend space around them, creating visual distortions that made tracking them nearly impossible. Their hulls were covered in weapons that appeared to violate several known laws of physics. And the energy readings coming from their cores suggested power sources that should have been impossible for any civilization to harness safely. The Kethmori probe tried to communicate with the strange biomechanical, collective intelligence that controlled its species. It needed to report what it had found, to warn the main fleet that humanity was not the primitive prey they had expected. It never got the chance. The probe's destruction was so sudden and complete that the main Kethmori fleet barely registered it happening. One moment their scout was transmitting sensor data about the human homeworld. The next moment there was nothing but empty space and a faint energy signature that tasted of death and burning stars. Admiral Chen stood in the command center of the UES Retribution, watching the tactical display that showed the scattered remains of the Kethmori probe. Around her, the bridge crew worked with the efficient calm of professionals who had spent weeks preparing for this moment. "First blood to us," she announced, and her officers allowed themselves small smiles of satisfaction. The Retribution was one of humanity's new extinction-class battleships, vessels designed using technology that most Confederation species would have banned as too dangerous. The ship's main weapon was a controlled black hole that could be fired like a bullet, tearing holes in space-time itself. Its defensive systems included armor made from crystallized, dark matter and shields that existed partially outside normal reality. Most disturbing of all was the crew. The human officers aboard the Retribution had volunteered for enhancement procedures that pushed the boundaries of what could still be called human. Their reaction times had been boosted to superhuman levels. Their brains had been modified to interface directly with the ship's quantum computers. Some had undergone procedures that replaced significant portions of their biology with technology that was barely understood. They had become something between human and machine, perfectly adapted for the kind of war they were about to fight. "Ma'am," reported Lieutenant Zhang from the sensor station, "we're detecting movement from the main Kethmori fleet. They're changing course toward our position." Chen nodded. The probe's destruction had been intentionally obvious, designed to get the enemy's attention. Now the real test would begin. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Execute Hunter Protocol." Across the solar system, humanity's new warships began to move. They didn't form defensive lines or protective formations. Instead, they spread out like a pack of wolves preparing to surround their prey. The Kethmori main fleet arrived 3 days later. 12 massive harvester ships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with alien life. Each ship was a floating city of horrors, home to billions of consumed souls, and powered by the life force of dead civilizations. They expected to find a primitive species cowering behind whatever defenses they could improvise. Instead, they found something that had never existed before in their millions of years of existence. They found prey that had chosen to become predators. The human fleet attacked from all directions simultaneously. Ships appeared out of nowhere, their stealth systems using technology reverse-engineered from captured Kethmori scout vessels. They fired weapons that shouldn't have existed, bullets made from collapsed stars, energy beams that aged their targets to death, missiles that existed in multiple dimensions at once. The Kethmori tried to respond with their feeding tendrils, the biomechanical appendages that had turned every other species into crystallized art. The tendrils struck human ships and simply stopped. The vessels were protected by defensive systems that made them effectively immune to biomechanical conversion. For the first time in their existence, the Kethmori felt something they had no name for: fear. The battle lasted for hours, spreading across the entire solar system. Human ships darted between the massive Kethmori vessels like deadly insects, inflicting damage that accumulated over time. The ancient entities tried to retreat, but found their escape routes blocked by human vessels that had somehow predicted their movements. One by one, the harvester ships began to die. The process was slow and methodical. Human forces targeted the biomechanical nodes that controlled each ship's vital functions, gradually shutting down the alien vessels like a doctor performing surgery on a patient. When each ship was finally disabled, human boarding parties moved in. What they did to the captured Kethmori was never officially recorded, but the screams that echoed across subspace frequencies suggested that humanity had learned new ways to inflict suffering on beings that had considered themselves beyond such concerns. By the end of the battle, 11 of the 12 harvester ships had been destroyed or captured. The survivor limped away into deep space, carrying news that would shake the Kethmori collective to its ancient core. The prey had learned to hunt. Admiral Chen stood in the wreckage of what had once been a Kethmori command vessel, studying the biomechanical technology that lined the walls. Her enhanced vision could see patterns in the alien systems that normal human eyes would miss, and her modified brain was already formulating plans for how this technology could be turned against its creators. "Ma'am," said Commander Hayes, his own enhancements making his voice sound slightly mechanical, "we're receiving communications from the surviving Confederation leadership. They want to know what happened here." Chen smiled, though the expression looked different now that half her face had been replaced with quantum processing nodes. "Tell them," she said, "that humanity has decided to take a more active role in galactic affairs." Around her, human technicians worked to strip useful technology from the captured ship. They moved with the efficiency of beings who had spent weeks preparing for this moment, dismantling alien systems with tools that sparked and crackled with barely contained energy. The galaxy had wanted humanity to handle the Kethmori threat. They were about to get exactly what they had asked for, and they were going to regret ever doubting what humans could accomplish when they were properly motivated. The Kethmori had never retreated before. In millions of years of existence, they had consumed entire galaxies without ever encountering meaningful resistance. They were apex predators in a universe full of prey, biomechanical gods that fed on the life force of lesser beings. But now, for the first time in their ancient history, they were running. The surviving harvester ship that had escaped Earth's solar system carried terrible news back to the main collective. The humans were not like other species. They didn't just fight, they adapted. They had somehow learned to resist biomechanical conversion, the fundamental process that made the Kethmori unstoppable. Worse, they had demonstrated weapons and tactics that should have been impossible for such a young species to develop. The Kethmori collective mind, a vast intelligence spread across thousands of biomechanical ships, experienced something it had no experience processing: uncertainty. For the first time in 3 million years, they decided to change their strategy. Instead of the methodical consumption of entire star systems, the Kethmori began to retreat toward the galaxy's outer rim. They would regroup, analyze what they had learned about humanity, and develop countermeasures. Then they would return to finish their harvest. It was a reasonable plan that might have worked against any other species. But humanity wasn't interested in giving them time to regroup. Admiral Chen stood in the briefing room of the UES Vengeance, studying holographic displays that showed Kethmori movements across the galaxy. The ship was humanity's newest creation, an Apocalypse-class vessel that pushed the boundaries of what could be called a starship. Its hull was forged from materials that existed partially outside normal spacetime, and its crew had undergone enhancements that made them barely recognizable as the species they had once been. "The enemy is attempting a strategic withdrawal," reported Colonel Martinez, the ship's intelligence officer. His voice carried electronic harmonics, a side effect of the neural implants that allowed him to interface directly with the ship's quantum computers. "They're consolidating their forces in the void reaches, approximately 12,000 light-years from the galactic core." "Estimated enemy strength?" Chen asked. "Over 3,000 harvester ships plus support vessels and biomechanical installations. They're building something in the dead space between star systems. Our long-range probes can't get close enough to determine exactly what." Chen nodded, studying the tactical display. The Kethmori had chosen their retreat position well. The void reaches were a region of space with very few stars, making it difficult for conventional forces to operate effectively. Any attacking fleet would have to travel vast distances without refueling stations or supply bases. For a normal military force, it would be an impossible challenge. Fortunately, humanity was no longer normal. "Signal the hunt fleet," Chen ordered. "We begin Phase 2. Across human space, ships began to move. Not the elegant vessels that other species favored, but brutal constructions designed for a single purpose: the complete extermination of an enemy that had threatened everything humanity cared about. The hunt fleet consisted of 47 ships, each one a masterpiece of weaponized technology. They carried crews who had volunteered for enhancements that pushed them beyond the boundaries of baseline humanity. Some had undergone procedures that replaced significant portions of their biology with quantum processing systems. Others had allowed their consciousness to be partially merged with their ship's artificial intelligence. They were no longer entirely human, but they were still human enough to remember why they were fighting. The fleet moved through space using technology that bent the laws of physics to its breaking point. They traveled through folded space-time, riding gravitational waves like ancient sailors riding ocean currents. When they needed to refuel, they stopped at uninhabited stars and drained them of energy, leaving behind cooling white dwarf remnants. The journey to the void reaches took 3 weeks. During that time, human scouts tracked the Kethamori construction project with growing alarm. The biomechanical entities weren't just building ships. They were creating something that resembled a massive breeding facility, designed to produce new types of horrors specifically adapted to fight humanity. "They're learning," observed Dr. Sarah Kim, the fleet's xenobiologist. Her enhanced vision could perceive details in the alien structures that normal eyes would miss. "These new biomechanical forms show adaptations to our weapon types: enhanced resistance to quantum disruption, improved shielding against temporal attacks." "Let them adapt," Chen replied coldly. "We'll adapt faster." When the hunt fleet finally reached the edge of the void reaches, they found the Kethamori waiting for them. The enemy had arranged their forces in a defensive formation around their construction facility. Thousands of biomechanical ships formed concentric shells of protection, their feeding tendrils writhing in apparent anticipation. At the center of the formation, something vast and terrible was taking shape, a biomechanical construct the size of a small moon. It was beautiful in the way that certain kinds of death are beautiful. Elegant and graceful and absolutely wrong. "All ships," Chen announced across the fleet communication network, "commenced the hunt." What followed wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. Battles involved two forces meeting and fighting until one side achieved victory. This was something entirely different. This was extermination. The human ships didn't attack in formation. Instead, they scattered across the battlefield like a pack of predators surrounding a herd. Each vessel operated independently, using enhanced AI systems and quantum-linked communication to coordinate their movements in real time. They fought with weapons that violated the basic principles of civilized warfare. Reality disruption bombs that caused sections of space-time to simply cease existing. Temporal missiles that aged their targets to death in seconds. Ships that used dying stars as ammunition, firing collapsed stellar cores like bullets. The Kethamori responded with their own horrors. Biomechanical creatures the size of cities emerged from the harvester ships, their bodies bristling with weapons that fired pure life force energy. The new adapted forms proved resistant to many human weapons, their enhanced biology allowing them to survive attacks that would have destroyed earlier Kethamori units. But humanity had been preparing for this possibility. The human crews activated their final enhancement protocols. Soldiers who had already been modified beyond recognition underwent additional procedures that pushed them past the edge of what could be called human. They became living weapons, their consciousness partially uploaded into quantum processing, systems that allowed them to think and react at superhuman speeds. Captain Marcus Webb of the UES Nemesis felt his awareness expand as the enhancement protocols took full effect. His ship wasn't just a vessel anymore, it was an extension of his body. He could feel the quantum fluctuations in its hull, sense the energy flowing through its weapon systems, experience the pain when enemy fire struck its armor. He was no longer entirely Marcus Webb, and he was no longer entirely human. But he was still angry about what had happened to New Pittsburgh, and that anger had been refined and focused by technology into something pure and deadly. Webb's ship danced through the Kethamori formation like a living thing, its movements too fast and unpredictable for the biomechanical entities to track. It fired weapons that shouldn't have existed, each shot precisely calculated to inflict maximum damage on alien systems that had been designed to be invulnerable. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as enhanced human crews pushed their ships beyond all reasonable limits. They fought with the desperate fury of a species that had been threatened with extinction, but channeled that fury through technology that made them more dangerous than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The battle lasted for 18 hours. When it ended, the void reaches were littered with the wreckage of thousands of Kethmori ships. The massive biomechanical construction at the center of their formation had been reduced to crystallized debris that sparkled like broken dreams in the starlight. But humanity's victory came at a cost. Several ships had been lost, their crews consumed by biomechanical entities that had managed to breach their defenses. Other vessels had suffered damage to their quantum systems, leaving their enhanced crews partially disconnected from their ship's consciousness. Chen stood in the wreckage of what had once been the Kethmori command facility, studying biomechanical technology that hurt to look at directly. Her enhanced vision could perceive patterns in the alien systems that revealed their true purpose. They weren't just building ships, she reported to the rest of the fleet. This facility was designed to create a new form of Kethmori consciousness, something specifically adapted to fight us. Did they succeed? Asked Captain Webb, his voice carrying electronic harmonics that made it sound alien. Chen studied the readings on her quantum scanner, cross-referencing them with data from the captured biomechanical systems. After several minutes, she allowed herself a small smile. No, she said. They ran out of time. But as the Hunt fleet prepared to return to human space, their long-range sensors detected something troubling. The surviving Kethmori ships weren't retreating randomly. They were moving with purpose, following courses that would take them to a specific destination. The galactic core was dying. Ancient civilizations that had existed for millions of years were going silent one by one. The eternal archive of the Builders, a repository of knowledge older than most stars, transmitted its final message before falling dark. The crystal cities of Nexus Prime, home to beings of pure energy, simply stopped existing. The Kethmori had found something in the galactic core that made them more dangerous than ever before. Admiral Chen stood in the command center of humanity's most advanced vessel, the UES Extinction. The ship was less than 2 weeks old, built using technology stripped from captured Kethmori vessels and powered by energy sources that most scientists considered theoretical impossibilities. Report, she ordered, her voice carrying electronic harmonics that marked her as one of the most heavily enhanced humans in the fleet. The enemy has established a base of operations around the galactic core black hole, reported Dr. Kim, her enhanced consciousness interfacing directly with the ship's quantum sensors. They're using the black hole's energy to power some kind of amplification device. Our model suggests they're trying to turn the entire galactic core into a biomechanical feeding system. Chen studied the holographic display that showed the enemy's position. The Kethmori had arranged their remaining ships in a complex pattern around Sagittarius A, the supermassive black hole at the galaxy's center. Energy streams flowed between the biomechanical vessels and the black hole's accretion disk, creating a web of power that pulsed with malevolent life. If they succeed, Dr. Kim continued, they'll be able to consume every inhabited world in the galaxy simultaneously. The entire galactic population would be converted to biomechanical energy within hours. The implications were staggering. The Kethmori weren't just trying to feed anymore. They were attempting to transform the galaxy itself into a single, massive biomechanical organism under their control. Time until completion? Chen asked. 18 hours, Dr. Kim replied. Maybe less. Chen felt the quantum processing nodes in her brain calculate probability matrices at superhuman speed. The numbers were not encouraging. Even with humanity's enhanced technology, reaching the galactic core and defeating the Kethmori in 18 hours seemed impossible. But humanity had made a career out of doing impossible things. Signal all available ships, Chen ordered. Emergency protocol. Every vessel capable of quantum transit, regardless of current mission status. Ma'am, said Captain Torres, now more machine than human after multiple enhancement procedures. That includes the experimental ships, the ones with untested drive systems. All of them, Chen confirmed. We're not holding anything back. Across human space, ships that had never been intended for combat began to move. Research vessels equipped with reality manipulation engines, prototype ships powered by controlled singularities, even the experimental time ship Kronos, whose temporal drive existed partially outside normal causality. They were humanity's last desperate gamble. Technology pushed beyond all safety limits in a final attempt to save the galaxy. The journey to the galactic core normally took months, even with the fastest ships. Humanity made it in 6 hours. They arrived using methods that violated several fundamental laws of physics. Some ships rode gravitational waves compressed to impossible densities. Others used quantum tunneling on a macroscopic scale, essentially teleporting through space-time. The Kronos arrived first, having traveled backward through time to reach the battlefield before it had actually left human space. What they found at the galactic core defied description. The Kethmori had transformed the space around the supermassive black hole into something that resembled a vast biomechanical flower. Thousands of ships formed the petals, their hulls connected by streams of energy that pulsed with alien life. At the center, the black hole itself had been modified, its accretion disk shaped into patterns that hurt to perceive directly. The entire construct was nearly complete. Energy readings showed that the biomechanical amplifier was already beginning to extend its influence beyond the galactic core, sending out tentacles of corrupted spacetime that would eventually reach every inhabited world. All ships, Chen announced across the fleet communication network, begin final approach. Remember, we don't need to destroy them all. We just need to disrupt the amplifier before it reaches full power. The human fleet attacked from every direction simultaneously, their movements coordinated by quantum-linked communication systems that operated faster than light. They fired weapons that shouldn't have existed, bullets made from crystallized time, energy beams that existed in 11 dimensions, missiles that turned their targets inside out at the quantum level. The Kethmori responded with biomechanical horrors that made their previous creations look tame. Creatures the size of moons emerged from the larger ships, their bodies incorporating technology stolen from the consumed civilizations of the galactic core. They fired weapons powered by the life force of entire species, beams of pure extinction that erased anything they touched from existence. The battle was unlike anything the universe had ever witnessed. Ships fought duels across distances measured in light minutes, their weapons creating new types of space-time distortions. The fabric of reality began to buckle under the strain of technologies that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible, but humanity had one advantage that the Kethmori hadn't anticipated. They were willing to sacrifice everything. Captain Webb of the UES Nemesis was the first to make the ultimate choice. His ship had been badly damaged in the opening minutes of the battle, its quantum drives failing and its enhanced crew dying from system overloads. But the ship still carried one functional weapon, its entire power core, a controlled singularity that could be destabilized on command. Admiral, Webb's voice crackled across the communication network, distorted by the energy storms raging around his dying ship. I'm going to try something stupid. Chen understood immediately. Captain, that's a direct order to— With respect, ma'am, Webb interrupted. You're not my commanding officer anymore. I transferred my consciousness to the ship's AI 3 hours ago. I'm not really human anymore, so human military regulations don't apply. Before Chen could respond, the Nemesis began its final attack run. The ship accelerated directly toward the center of the Kethmori amplifier, its damaged hull streaming plasma and its remaining weapons firing continuously. Biomechanical entities swarmed around it, trying to stop its approach, but Webb had programmed the ship's AI to ignore everything, except its final target. The Nemesis struck the amplifier's central node and destabilized its singularity core. The explosion was visible from 12 star systems away. A new star blazed briefly in the galactic core, its light carrying the screams of dying Kethmori across subspace frequencies. When the light faded, a significant portion of the biomechanical amplifier had been reduced to scattered particles, but the device was still functional. Damaged but operational. The surviving Kethmori ships began to reposition themselves, trying to compensate for the damage to their amplifier. Energy readings showed that they could still complete their project, though it would take longer and require more power than originally planned. Chen made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her unnaturally extended life. "All ships," she announced, "implement Omega Protocol." The Omega Protocol was humanity's ultimate contingency plan, developed in the darkest hours after New Pittsburgh's destruction. It was a strategy so extreme that most human military leaders had hoped they would never need to use it. Every ship in the human fleet began to overload its power systems simultaneously. The process was methodical and irreversible. Enhanced crews who had already sacrificed most of their humanity made the final choice to abandon their physical existence entirely. They uploaded their consciousness into their ship's quantum computers and began the process of converting their vessels into massive weapons. Ships became guided missiles. Crews became targeting systems. The entire human fleet transformed itself into a single, coordinated attack designed to destroy the Kethmori amplifier completely. Chen watched from the bridge of the extinction as her fleet began its final charge. Around her, the last remaining human crew members worked calmly at their stations, preparing for a battle they knew they wouldn't survive in any recognizable form. "Ma'am," said Dr. Kim, her voice already beginning to take on the electronic harmonics that marked successful consciousness transfer. "It's been an honor serving with you." "The honor was mine," Chen replied, initiating her own transfer sequence. "See you on the other side." One by one, the human ships struck the Kethmori amplifier. Each impact released energy equivalent to a nova, tearing holes in space-time itself. The biomechanical construct began to collapse, its carefully designed patterns disrupted by forces that even the ancient entities couldn't control. The Kethmori collective consciousness felt something it had never experienced before: panic. Their ultimate weapon was being destroyed by an enemy that had chosen extinction over defeat. The biomechanical entities tried to salvage what they could, but it was too late. The amplifier's destruction created a cascade reaction that spread throughout the Kethmori fleet. Ships that had been connected to the device found their biomechanical systems overloading as corrupted energy feedback.